All right, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is Wednesday, April 24th, 6 p.m., Provo City Planning Commission. Let's start with a Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner South. Then we'll go to a roll call.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll start with Commissioner Hill. Roll call, just state your name and if you have any conflicts.
Jonathan Hill, no conflicts.
Melissa Kendall, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Daniel Gonzalez, no conflicts.
For real, Lisa Jensen, no conflicts.
Andrew South, no conflicts.
Barbie DeSoto, no conflicts.
All right, although this is a public hearing, only the presenters and those invited by the commission may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please wait to speak until called on. When speaking, please be sure to speak into the microphone so that the record is clear. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Please limit side conversations as they interfere with the audio recording. If you need to have a side conversation, please step out of the chambers. Please do not attempt to interrupt or speak over others. Intimidating or threatening speech or behavior will not be tolerated at any time. Please refrain from clapping, cheering, booing, or being otherwise disruptive during the hearing. We'll begin with item number 1. Dudley Associates requests a zone map amendment from the A 1.5 agricultural zone to the R 1.8 one-family residential zone in order to create a 3-lot single-family subdivision located at 1342 North Geneva Road. It's in the Lakeview North neighborhood. And our staff member, Nancy Robinson, will be presenting.
Hello. So we have, this is our map of Geneva Road. Shows that the property there at 1342. They have currently it's 1 lot, but they would like to split it into 3 lots. Each of the lots are over 14,000 square feet each. It would be in the R18 zone. And UDOT has given permission for them to have 2 driveway accesses instead of 3. So 2 of the properties will share 1 driveway. And staff would love to see this development and would recommend approval. They think it's a good way to add just a few more single family lots in Provo. So.
Any questions for staff?
Do we have any idea which 2 lots would end up sharing and what that might look like?
I don't think they've given that information yet.
Okay.
Since this is just the plat map, they weren't required to give like a concept plan or anything.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if you can tell us how close this is to the one we did a few weeks ago. Because we talked about the road, the subdivision to the north, and it looks like it's right next to it.
So there's actually one that's, let's see, let me go back. So the one that we, see, it's not even showing on this map that I have. The one that we did just a couple of weeks ago is at 1098. So that's at
A little bit to the south.
yeah.
And is all this area that is shown here, is that all R18 except for the area in red, or what's the adjacent zoning?
Agricultural on some of the sides, and then R18 on the other, on the north and to the east.
Any other questions for staff? I don't think there are any more left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, we'll go ahead. If the applicant is here.
It's in the back.
Okay, go ahead. You'll have 15 minutes for your presentation. When your time is up, you will hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Following your presentation, if we have any questions, we will invite you to come forward at that time. The floor is yours. The microphone's yours.
Thank you.
Please state your name and.
Yeah, I'm Roger Dudley, the engineer for the project representing the DeVitas. I'm not sure I have anything to add to it. We've had some meetings with UDOT and with the city staff with engineering and planning. We think this is probably a good use for the land. They intend to construct 2 additional residences there for family members, basically. So that's our proposal. Happy to answer any questions that you might have that I might be able to help with.
Go ahead, Commissioner Jensen.
I'm just wondering why they're asking for R18 zoning instead of R110 since their lots are so enormous.
The thought was that the zoning around us is R18. We just felt that that was probably a good extension for that zone.
And is the reason for there only being 3 instead of more since there's so much land because there's not access on Geneva Road?
That's part of it. We actually sketched a concept that showed a little cul-de-sac coming back in to try and come with more lots. It doesn't really work. The configuration of it's a trapezoidal piece. Putting a cul-de-sac in the middle of it really doesn't give them any additional lots. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you aware if there's any open irrigation ditches on the property or wells?
There is. There's an irrigation ditch that runs north and south along the east boundary and then turns and goes along the south boundary.
Sound about.
Some of that they have already piped, and the plan is to pipe the balance of it.
Okay.
We've had Eldon Packer there, and he's met with them, and we've met with him with the irrigation company. And so that'll be part of our engineering plans when that comes to the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Good.
I think that's it.
Okay.
We'll go ahead and let you go. Thank you, Mr. Dudley. Okay. Is there anyone from the neighborhood or the district, neighborhood representative, district representative? No? Okay. With that, we'll now open the hearing to public comments. When your time is up, you'll hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Each person may make 1 comment. If we have questions, we will invite you to come back to the microphone at that time. The time is for comments only. If you have questions about an item, please speak with staff privately. And anyone from the community? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone come forward from this for this item. With that, we'll go ahead and close the hearing, close the public comment portion of the hearing on this item. Okay. Well, commissioners, anything you'd like to discuss on this project? Commissioner Jensen.
Robert wants to say something.
Looks like it's going to be a good use of the property. I'm certainly in favor of it.
I would say, like, I can imagine if there was something with a greater density, you can anticipate maybe some public concern about it, but with 2 drives and the 3 lots, it seems that prevented anyone from coming out and opposing it.
I don't feel like it's giving us a whole much more housing stock. I know that was some of the argument that was given in the staff report was that it's increasing the housing stock. I guess 2 is better than 0, but Yeah, I think it meets the plan otherwise, meets the general plan purpose.
Commissioner Kendall, did you want to say something?
Well, just that it does provide some of those other, like, we're seeing smaller, more dense, single-family residences, and this is an option for a little bigger yard and, I think it's fine. Like you said, you can't really get much more in there anyway. Putting in a cul-de-sac doesn't really give them more space, more lots.
I have a procedural question for staff, maybe Mr. Pepperoni. Why doesn't a subdivision need a separate concept plan item when they ask for a zone change? Like if this was a project plan that was asking for a zone change, we would have to see the concept plan and we would have to see the zone change. Is it just because it's only a 3-lot subdivision, it's not big enough to warrant something like that?
Well, can you hear me? Is this working? The plan you saw was basically a concept plan. And staff's comments to that was, we don't really want and don't think UDOT's going to want 3 driveways on to the street. So you're going to need to combine so that 2 lots share one of those. So we haven't seen that plan yet, but I think the plan you show is basically a concept plan. It shows it showed how it's going to be subdivided.
And then will that subdivision be approved administratively? So that's why
Yes.
we're not seeing that plan as well.
Right.
Okay.
Do we need to put any conditions if we're inclined to recommend approval? Do we need to put any conditions for UDOT approval?
Well, we typically have in your conditions of approval that all the CRC comments are met. Is that condition in your staff report?
It's not.
So that would be a good thing to say then, that
Okay.
all CRC conditions be met as part of this approval. Because I'm sure that will be in our has been in our CRC comments.
Okay. Just make a note of that, commissioners, if you want to, in putting forward a motion. Is anyone, I'm not hearing a lot of comments on it, but I'm welcome to entertain a motion and we can have a discussion on that.
And Mr. Dudley's representation about the larger subdivision of the cul-de-sac was accurate. The staff and his team worked on that for a long time, trying to find something that would work, and it just didn't work very well.
Okay, let's see.
I would say we should wait till they can combine with other land adjacent, but there's really not that much adjacent land left, so.
There isn't, there's just the property immediately south, really.
And those
Um,
already have houses on them that I don't imagine they'd want to
Yeah.
start over, so. I feel like if we're looking for reasons to recommend approval, this meets the intent of the general plan in multiple ways and it fits in with the surrounding area, so I can't see a reason not to. Go ahead and approve it, recommend it.
Will you phrase that in the form of a motion?
Are you asking me for a motion? All right. I will make a motion that we forward a positive recommendation to the municipal council to approve the zone map amendment from A15 agricultural to R18 single family residential in order to create a 3-lot single family subdivision located at 1342 North Geneva Road in the Lakeview North neighborhood, with the condition that they meet all the CRC comments.
Any discussion on the motion? Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second.
There's a second, by Commissioner Knudsen. We'll go ahead and vote on it. Commissioner Hill?
Aye.
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 Okay, that approval is 7-0. We'll move on to item number 2. Sierra Moore requests project plan approval for a new 3-story office building in the SC2 Community Shopping Center zone, located at 1255 South State Street, Provo South neighborhood. Staff member Wright.
All right, thank you very much. So this item located here on South State Street it was the former theater, the drive-in movie theater location. It's a vacant lot, just under 10 acres. And the applicant is proposing to develop half of it at this time. So there would be a subdivision of the property, dividing the property in half, and they'd be building an office building on the south side of this parcel. The zoning on the property is the SC2, the shopping center zone, and it's surrounded by residential properties in the low density residential. Across the street, there's some townhomes, and there's commercial to the north and south as well on this around this property, as well as a park across the street. The total parking requirement is exceeded. They've provided sufficient parking to the square footage being proposed for the project. And staff has reviewed the proposed project along with the SC2 zone requirements and find that they would meet the requirements of the zone. There is a trash enclosure that's been placed in you can see in the top right-hand corner of the screen is where the trash enclosure is, and that's adjacent to that residential zone. So one of the conditions in the staff report is that trash enclosure be relocated to meet the distance, the 25-foot setback requirement that our code has. The landscape plan has been reviewed. We took this project to the design review committee. They approved the landscape. South State Street's a design corridor, so there's requirements that were met, and the design review committee was able to allow for parking to be placed in between the building and the street. So that was something as part of the design corridor allowed. And so, yeah, there's a buffer between the residential, a landscape buffer between the residential property on the side of it there to meet that code as well for the transitional standards that we have in our code when there's commercial placed next to residential. And then here are the elevations of the proposed project. It's a 3-story structure that would be, it's 52 feet in height. The zone allows up to 65 feet in height. So they're staying below that and complying with the code requirements there. And on this diagram, I've dimensioned out some of the distances that you can see from where the building will be located to where those residential homes are, because we've gotten some concerns presented to staff that were concerned about the height of the structure, a 3-story structure built adjacent to their homes. And so this helps show, I think, they receive a postcard and see that there's a 3-story structure being proposed next to them. I think that raised some concerns, but this helps show the distance that it's actually set back from those residential areas to help give some perspective there. So 230 feet from those 2-story condos on the east, 160 feet from the condos on the south, and 200 feet across State Street to those across the street. So I think that helps illustrate some of that. And staff has some conditions or recommended conditions of approval. That's the remaining CRC approvals are given, that the plat that subdivides the property in half is recorded, and that trash enclosure's relocated on the property to be 25 feet away from that residential property line. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
All right. Before we go on with questions for you, I want to make sure if the applicant is here, and if you haven't, there were some community letters that came in this morning, and if you would like to read them and kind of address them, Sandy, do you still have those new letters from this morning? Or do we have them up here?
I can make sure they're posted on the website.
Okay.
The first 3 are posted on the website right now. We had 2 that were we received right before the meeting, pre-meeting started, so they weren't given a chance to get on the website, but all of the commissioners did have a chance to read them.
I was just going to make a recommendation that I've sort of bullet pointed those concerns, and when we get to the neighborhood comment portion, we can maybe just summarize them so that they know they've been heard.
That's fine. I just, and I guess in terms of efficiency, wanted to make sure that everyone's going to address not only our questions, but also anticipated comments from the public. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Wright? Commissioner Jensen has a few, and anyone else?
On page 5 of the staff report, there's in the parking lot 2 rectangles that seem to indicate something. And then I noticed, oh, they're on that one you just had as well. And then on this landscaping plan, they also don't have any trees in those 2 sections. I'm wondering if you can tell us what is going on there.
Yeah, so those two rows of parking there on the south side are going to be covered parking, so there's no landscaping because
Okay.
those 2 rows, they're going to have a roof structure over them.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, on page 3, you say in your staff report, the DRC, which I believe stands for Design Review Committee, approved the design of the project and allowed parking to be in front of the building as allowed in the design corridor. Most of the parking's in the back, so are you just saying there's a little bit that's visible from State Street because they approved it? Is that what that means?
Yeah, so because State Street's in the design corridor, there's a requirement that parking's
All in the back?
not between the building and the street, but there's a provision that allows the design review committee to approve an exception to that if they can show that it is needed and would work. And so that's what they did. And so there's
I only see handicap spots there too, so.
there's probably 6 or 7 handicap spots. The rest, like you said, are located along the north and in the back on the east behind the building.
I think the rest of my questions are for the applicant, so that's it.
Could I clarify something, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we go back to the aerial photo, the first photograph, yeah, that's fine. As Mr. Wright said at the beginning of his presentation, this site was originally the old Pioneer Drive-In, and the Pioneer Drive-In was more than just the SC2 zone. It included the housing to the east. The commercial zone that has been there for over 20 years was the justification for the townhomes and then the smaller single-family homes, smaller lots east of that. This was all one planned development that was done over 20 years ago. The city's been waiting those 20 years, hoping to get a grocery store at this location, and we just have not been able to make that happen. The zone allows other land uses, and that's what the property owner is proposing. If a grocery store had gone in, it probably would have been much bigger than this, much taller than this, and much closer to the neighborhood to the east than this is. So, although it's taken a long time to happen, this is probably a pretty good alternative for considering all the surrounding land uses.
I'll just make a note historically that the drive-in also included a swap meet on Saturdays. Any other questions for staff member Wright? Go ahead.
So SC2, this is not going to be storefronts that they're looking at. They're professional office spaces, right?
Correct.
And so we imagine that evening traffic, things like that should be pretty light. There won't be people working all hours of the night, typically, things like that. No noise at night, those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, I would imagine it would just be your standard business hours, and maybe light traffic in the evenings or something if someone was going into the office after hours. But
Excellent. That's just in response to one of the comments as well.
thanks.
Thank you. We'll release you. We'll probably call you back. Thank you, Mr. Wright.
For your request.
Yes.
Very quickly, I think I added the right file. It should have been the right file. It just normally doing it during a meeting on my laptop, so they should, the updated community letter should be available on the website.
Okay. I would just encourage, if anyone wants to read them, go to the city website. Yeah, we'll go ahead and have the applicant come forward. You'll have 15 minutes for your presentation, and when your time is up, you'll hear a ding, and the microphone will be muted. Following your presentation, if we have questions, we will invite you to come forward at that time. Please state your name and your affiliation or entity that you represent.
My name is Robert Pignon with MHTN Architects. We've been hired to do the design work on the project. Sierra Moore is also on my team.
Nick Sly with Apex Development Consulting, acting as owner's rep for this project.
Okay. All right. Any presentation or things you'd like to add in addition to the staff report?
So we appreciate the Planning Commission hearing the proposal. And as mentioned, this is a project that we've carefully spent a lot of time placing the building in the most appropriate location as it addresses the corner. We've been very sensitive to the scale of the project, how it addresses the corridor on State Street. And if we can turn just to the elevations for a few minutes, just want to address that the scale of the project, how the base is presented. If we just use, for example, the top one and zoom in a little bit more if possible, the west elevation, the first floor is all glass. It's pedestrian scale. It's not something that's large and ominous. It actually allows for that connectivity from inside outside. And then as you go up on levels 2 and 3, we've got a nice metal panel building, an aluminum panel system with some punched openings. And so bringing in a lot of daylight, making this a comfortable building to be inside of, but also to enjoy from the outside. The scale is such that it's not going to be very imposing. And as mentioned, it's currently it's shown as 52 feet. So within the bounds of all of the different requirements, we have met the intent of the code and are providing something that will enhance the corner and will beautify, if you will, State Street rather than having an empty lot. A lot of things are intended to be of benefit to the project. Whether you look at this from a sustainability standpoint, the landscape we're using is drought tolerant. The shading devices on the windows are in benefit of the building. We are solar ready. So we've anticipated that at the right time, we can add solar panels on top of the roof, and the shade structures that are in the parking area. EV cars, you could park them there and get the harness the energy from above. So a lot of consideration in terms of how to create something that will enhance the community that equals the scale of the buildings, the apartments that are to the west of us, carefully thought through. And so just to mention that providing the parking in front of the building along State Street was intentionally done so that it does become a front door to the community. We don't anticipate a lot of people walking to the building. A lot of people are going to drive, but should there be someone that's walking along the street and getting off a bus, by adding that extra row of parking, it actually becomes a front door. So we have doors on either side that come into a central reception area. And then from there, people will be able to move about the building. So a lot of care was taken into making sure that the building's legible, that it has a nice scale, that the materials are nice and appropriate for what we're presenting at this time. Thank you.
Just add one thing. I think, as Bill mentioned, the city had reached out to several grocery chains to try to attract interest there, but also the owners group did the same thing. I mean, that was an initial intent to try to attract somebody. They just could not get anybody interested. And that's why going down this route became the next step. Thanks.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and where am I? I'm distracted. Any questions for the applicant?
I do.
I have a couple. If you
You can go first.
you go. Well,
Let's arm
I'll
wrestle.
go. I'm curious out of the grocery portion. Did you ever contact Aldi's? Were they ever in the considered? I know they do smaller footprint things, and one of the limitations of this property is size, in terms of getting a big, large thing.
Not sure. I honestly didn't come prepared with that list when we did the DRC meeting, the community meeting. We had that and kind of went through that list thoroughly with that group, but can get that fairly easy with the groups that we reached out to. So.
Right, Commissioner Jensen.
I'm wondering if you can tell us two things about the uses of the property. So first, the property in question, what sort of tenants do you anticipate occupying it? Maybe you already have them secured, so I thought you could tell us about that and the hours that they would keep. And then the second, if you have this information, what are the ideas you have for the plan to the north? For the property to the north, is that in the same, like this is phase one and that'll be phase two?
So first question, single source tenant going to occupy the whole building, 8 to 5 hours, generally speaking, just kind of like what was mentioned, a few off hours if needed for certain reasons, but pretty general office hours is what's going to be kept there. And then the second question, not known at this point. There is really no need of this specific tenant to want to expand. So it would probably be trying to attract a sell of the property to something similar, maybe, or something that could be of use to the city. Open to thoughts and ideas. The intent really is just to get this single structure done for this tenant.
The reason I ask is, first of all, to give the neighbors sort of an idea of how it would evolve. But secondly, just because I would love for the access in the parking lot to take that into account so that if it's something that's compatible, that maybe the two properties would be connected. Because right now it shows that it dead ends there. So
Do we have a site plan that we can pull up? So to your point, I think it's important to recognize that there are three major, if we look straight up, there are three major access points
onto the roads.
onto the north property.
Oh, okay.
And so we have intentionally left that available for a cross-access agreement.
Oh, perfect.
And exactly to your point, you would want to have curb cuts that are too close. So that top curb cut would function as the north property's south entry point.
Perfect.
And so that is.
I'm glad you took that into account.
Yes.
Could you also maybe talk about, I think we've addressed noise as a concern. If the hours are 8 to 5, there's no manufacturing that's happening in this building. What about the lights that you have in the parking lot? Are they going to be the kind of lights that are, that deflect so they're not going to the properties around them and are just illuminating the parking lot? Or have you thought about that at all?
So I probably need to look at the specification, but they would probably have cutoff and have minimal trespass. So that would be the responsible thing to do. And everything would be downlight, other than if there's an American flag, we'd want to uplight that. But
Okay.
otherwise would be compliant with night sky's intent.
I imagine if there was an American flag, it wouldn't be in the back. So that's probably not a big issue anyway. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Any other questions? I'm curious if you'd considered doing something a larger scale. There's some community in the letters and comments. It seems there's some reservations about the scale of this, but to me, I look at this as State Street being a major corridor with the capacity for something bigger, and maybe a building as big as this might be too small. But I just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, like Robert said, there was thought of just trying to be something conservative to work with residents and people and neighbors and people around, to not try to drive to the maximum immediately. So, I mean, that was a valid thought process in our full design. We tried to maximize our space. We tried to use the the space that we had and maximize, and we really utilized what we needed for this tenant. So.
Well, and just another follow-up question. Having the tenant in mind already and the, I'm sure maybe the number of employees that they might have is the parking adequate for the employees? Are there going to be more than 250 employees?
It is adequate. And if you look at just the balance of building and then the requirement for parking and the available land used while maintaining enough land for the north parcel, it is adequate and it balances out real nice. Otherwise, you'd be putting in a parking structure, which has its implications financially and just from a sense of scale. So this is a pretty responsible way to address the needs of the tenant while maximizing the use of the land and not taking it all the way to its limits.
Is there too much parking? I'm curious. I mean, if there's 100 employees and the hours are 9 to 5 and it's
our FTE count is pretty close to what we're providing, so we're satisfied with how the use of the land and what we're able to accommodate. And so we are just right at that line.
Okay.
268 provided, 253 required.
I'm going to interject here with your question
Sure.
because even if this company that's going to be the tenant doesn't need that many parking spaces, I don't want to underpark the facility in case the tenant changes and then we suddenly need more.
Sure. That's fair. Director Pepperoni, did you? Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Newton.
Are there any bus stops along that area?
Yes,
There are. Okay.
right out on
Close?
State Street.
I can't comment.
I think there's only 2 bus routes that pick up along there and they're very infrequent, but they do drop off on both sides of State Street along there.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions for you guys. Go ahead and feel free to sit down.
Thank you.
We'll recall you up if questions come up along the way. With that, this is in Provo South neighborhood. Is there any neighborhood representatives here? I can't remember which district. Is there any district representatives here? I know there were district meetings on this particular project. I'm not seeing any district or neighborhood representatives. We'll go ahead and open the hearing to public comment. When your time is up, you'll hear a ding and the microphone will be muted. Each person may make 1 comment. If we have any questions, we will invite you to come back to the microphone at that time. This time is for comments only. If you have questions about an item, please speak with staff privately. So you can speak to Mr. Wright or Director Pepperoni so that we can keep the meeting going along. I see there's a lot of members from the community here. Love to hear from everybody. You'll be limited to 2 minutes. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak, and so we'll limit it to 2 minutes. So please come forward and state your name, where you live, and then after you start talking, the timer will start.
My name is Shay Rutenbeek. Do you need my actual address or just about?
What city do you live in?
I'm in Provo.
Okay.
So I just back up right to the construction area. And I agree, this is a much better option than some of the other allowed uses. And I'm grateful that there's parking between us and the building, but I do have just a few concerns. My biggest one is probably the trash area. We're just a few lots down from that, and 25 feet, I was looking at it today, it's still really close, and that area is really exposed, and so it just kind of bakes all day in the sun, so it's gonna probably not smell the greatest, and there might be flies or other issues, and so if that could be moved further west, that would be really great, I think, for the residences there. It looks like there's other options along that north end of the lot. And then lights in the parking lot were also a concern of mine and on the building as well. So hopefully where it is just an office space in the evening, it can be just as dim as possible. Because that is, I mean, it's all bedrooms on that backside. And then along the property line that we share, it shows a retaining wall, which I wasn't quite sure why it needs a retaining wall or what might be happening there because it's relatively flat. And then I also just want to make sure that the vegetation along that property line won't interfere with ours, just depending on what's built. I don't want roots coming under and disturbing the concrete or whatnot. So, but the lights and the trash are my two biggest concerns there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to recall the developer, maybe not right now, but if you could keep that in mind, the lights, trash, retaining wall. We'll bring you back up after public comment. Any other members from the public?
Commissioner Gonzalez, can I summarize the letters so that they know what we derived from them before they make comments, or do you want them to make comments first?
No, I saw one woman getting up. Please come forward. I want to prioritize that. We have read any letter that was received up until this afternoon. We've read them. We read them electronically and they're passed around. But go ahead.
My name is Ashley Belknap. I live on 1410, so we're backing right up. I'm a little concerned that most of your questions didn't really address the questions in the letters. I read all the letters. I think there's more to discuss here. As she said, lights are a big concern. Are they going to be on all night at even a dim level? I'm really concerned. Why is there covered parking? What's the purpose of it? It'll be back up right to my precise home. And then is there any idea that you guys have discussed of the windows on the third floor as they look east and into our backyards and into our homes, having any requirement on like reflective so they can't see into our private lives or our private areas of our homes? Other than that, I am very grateful. As she said, the parking lot placement seems great, but always questions about the lighting. And then I'm very confused as to what the purpose of the covered parking is. That'll kind of be an eyesore. And then actually incorrectly, there is a bus stop right on 1410 and 1320. It's used 4 times a day, and there are dozens and dozens of children. So that is quite a high traffic area right after this, thinking about when school comes and when people come to an office at the same time. I'd be very cognizant of that in your planning or in questions for them. That's all I have, but thank you.
I actually, if you could stay up, I have a couple follow-up questions with that. One, the bus stop on 1320 and 410, you said, is that are you talking, when you say bus stop, you're referring to a school
Provo
bus stop?
City School bus. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
Yeah,
then
we were talking about city bus. Sorry, I misunderstood that.
Yeah, and then the second thing with, can you elaborate more on on your concern with the covered parking? I know for a lot of people, it's considered an amenity for office workers. Like maybe the CEO gets to park there, and there's cars out of the sun. But could you speak more exactly on what your concern is with that?
It's an amenity for a business owner or a person visiting the business, not an amenity for a homeowner who's going to look at a steel structure rather than greenery or landscaping. So what is it going to look like? Are you going to have requirements for visually? It's quite close to the home lane on 1410. Right. That parking structure goes pretty far east. So, or the parking covering, I should call it. My apologies.
Okay. All right. And then I'm curious, my other question, just to follow up with yours, is what's the current property line like? Is there a fence there? Is there there's
fences that cover the back of every home, of every townhome on 14.
And are they like 4 foot, 3 foot fences, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot?
I would guess that they're 6 foot.
Are they like transparent, like a chain link, or is it?
They are solid white vinyl.
Okay.
But every home has on 1410, every home has a deck that is probably only, I would guess, 2 feet below the fence line. So it's actually quite high
Okay.
when you're on your deck.
And do the homes on those units, do they have trees in the backyards?
No.
Okay. I probably had couple other questions to follow up with.
I have a
Go ahead.
follow-up question. Is there anything limiting, like HOA that would limit you from putting trees or shrubs?
Yes,
If you chose to.
they're cement pads. So I don't know what I would
Cement
plant a tree
pads.
in. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ashley, right? Thank you. Ms. Belknap. Any other members from the public? Yeah, please come forward. Don't be shy about coming up. This is some of the most valuable parts of the commission hearings.
I'm Adriana Romney, and I just have a couple questions. So, with the light issue, wondering if it will be a warmer light, like a 30,000, 27,000, 2,700 Kelvin, like just a warmer, more cozy lighting around the neighborhoods instead of that blue, harsh, like UFO lighting, you know? And then also curious if this tall metal and glass structure will reflect the morning and evening light on the east and the west side into the neighboring windows of the residents that live just right along there. And I'm also curious about the building. I mean, we can see just the black and white, I don't know what it's
Elevations.
called. Elevations, but I'm curious what it looks like colored and if it will be something that feels more timeless and won't age maybe poorly throughout the years to, I guess, kind of elevate the neighboring, community and to just beautify it along there and that street, State Street, because I do see some buildings that have kind of gone downhill and it doesn't look too nice. And, we're adding more and more people and it would just be nice to keep it nice with that park that you guys put in across the street. So it's just a few thoughts on all of this. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Romney. Please, anyone else come forward? All right. I'm not seeing anyone else come forward. So we'll go ahead and I'd honestly love, this is my favorite part, is hearing from the public. But since nobody else is coming forward, we'll go ahead and close please come forward, sir. Please state your name and.
I don't have any opinion except I built Deer Haven over there, and we had about 100 homes running there, and all of them had to have a.
Can you move over to the microphone just a little bit more and state your name?
I have my teeth under. I wouldn't make an opinion until I looked into things further, but I own one that's still in there. But having the enclosed backyard, so the children aren't having a way to go running out, that we found was very helpful. The first phase of the Deer Haven was for this 40 years ago, but I bought the rest of the property and we wanted to have it so that it was good for families. It was basically designed for that. And I don't know what the channel, like I said, I just barely found out about it. That's why I'm late right now. But I'm going to go out and take a look at it and see what's going down. This is the old Deer Haven, what do you call it? Movie property, isn't it? Where
the Pioneer Drive-In. Pioneer Twin Drive-In.
Right. That was an interesting thing. But so right now I wouldn't have an opinion other than the fact that I think it'd be family oriented with the children. I know the ones that are on that side of the street of Deer Haven, those are mostly all family oriented, like she said, with the children. And so that street you're coming in to go up is used quite a bit. So I don't know if there are no covered parking. I don't know. I don't want to thwart anybody because I haven't done any research, but I just, as a citizen within children, having 26 grandchildren, I think I wanted to at least say something. So,
I appreciate it.
anybody,
And what's your name? I didn't catch your name.
I'm Gary Stone, Stone Associates.
Jerry
Real
Stone.
Estate and Development. And I had a partner when we did that quite a while, and it's been happening. One of my daughters still has her unit in there. But so don't do it close to something. I'm certainly going to go find out and make some opinions, because mostly it'd be the children.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Stone.
You bet.
Please, anyone else? Would love to hear from you. Yeah, I really do. I'm begging for it. I've been asking 5 or 6 times. Please state your name and where you live.
Jeremiah Mon. I actually live in Mapleton, but I still own my condo when I moved into Deerhaven. Sorry, Gary, I didn't buy it from you. I got it from D.R. Horton. I've had my condo there for 22 years. So I was part of this original group, part of the original Pioneer, and so I'll just say it's nice to see some development there. I mean, I was part of that original group that really wanted to see a shopping center in there, but that has been a struggle this long time. I would definitely say that probably the one piece I would say about that trash is getting it covered as well. I mean, that might help because the proximity, looking at maybe getting that covered. We actually did a development recently, just a few blocks this direction, and we put a covered, an enclosure. So not just a enclosure this way, but we actually had a roof on top of our dumpster because our dumpster is very close to some residential as well. So that's something that, that could work. Obviously, they've got to try to figure out, they're trying to run their channel, their dump truck right down the back, which is nice to keep away from the building itself, but then it parks it right next to the residences. And so, as you know, with dumpsters, they're usually open, and trash or not dumpsters, but garbage trucks themselves. The trucks themselves can lose trash, and we would not want the trash as the truck's going down that east edge. I think there's some risk of obviously trash falling off and going into people's backyards. So, if they move it over and take this channel closer to the building, that may not be as attractive to the tenant there, but would pull that further away from the residences. But it's nice to see something go in there. I'll say that for sure. And I'm glad that they did pull it away from the residences there, because that whole place I've been driving past that a long time. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else. We'll go ahead and close the hearing to public comments. If I could bring the applicant back up.
Do you want to have Lisa summarize those letters first?
Well, just as a refresher, you can come forward. But
So when I read the neighborhood letters that we received today and yesterday, the main concerns were about noise and light, specifically at night. There were concerns about noise during construction, about what clientele it would be in there. There were concerns about shade and visibility. And then today we've heard reflectivity and the architecture style being timeless. I have my own opinions about which one of those are a big deal and which ones of those have probably been taken care of by our discussion today, but I can wait till we have our discussion time to talk about my opinions on those.
Sure. Let's come up, if you want to address some of those, or all of those really.
So I'll talk to the dumpsters, the dumpster enclosure. So we have already received some city comment about this and already progressing to move it to a different location. We did feel like we did it per the design requirements, but want to be adjustable to that. And then to the parking canopy structures, they're minimal. We even tried to back it in a little bit. As you can see, it doesn't go all the way to the end of that drive aisle on those two levels. It is just a single level structure. We're trying to keep the height of it, down as much as possible. Is additional shade for vehicles, and it is something that the cities are all trying to do, is to try to eliminate how much blacktop's visibly seen. I think it helps with that. But it is something that we have desired to keep it part of the project. And then
Are there, if I can interrupt, are there
Yeah.
plans for solar on top of those?
no solar ready, but
Solar ready?
okay. And then Robert, why don't you speak to the parking lighting a little bit?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, the idea would be that it would be downlight, shielded, and minimal trespass at the property line. So these are all lead principles. Again, night sky principles. The intent here is to not create pollution and to not be obnoxious. I will say that it is possible that we would have some lighting on overnight for safety, but we will look at dimming that so that it can comply with minimum requirements to maintain and limit the amount of people hanging out overnight. So
Yeah.
I did make a list of other items. Are there any other specifics you wanted us to address?
I'll follow up with one, just to be clear, maybe for the public as well. Lighting is required. If this was blacked out or something, that's negligence when you're not lighting your property. Is that how you understand it?
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Knudsen, did you have? Yeah, the retaining wall. What can you tell us a little bit about the purpose of that when there's?
So in order for the site to be safe, and we're thinking about ice, we're thinking about winter conditions, you don't want the parking lot to be too steep. And so general rule of thumb is 2% is what we find to be safe in terms of being able to get out of a car without slipping and falling. In order for the site from all the edges to balance and work correctly, we have an 18-inch retaining wall functioning along the far east end. So in order for our slopes to be adequate for that function, we are using that perimeter edge to allow for 18 inches of retaining.
And what's higher, the parking lot or the houses behind?
The houses.
The houses. So the parking lot's lower.
And this is, to be clear, this is to prevent the runoff and drainage into their lots. Is that right?
Exactly right. But also just to level that out and create, adequate slopes for the parking lot. Also, as part of that is that retaining wall is actually a precast wall that acts as both. It is the requirement of the city for us to have that fence, that wall between residential and commercial anyway. So we have to have that provided on that line as well. So.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask for the landscape drawing to be pulled up?
Yes. Work our way there.
I just want to point out, I want to point out that we're meeting the code required landscape for both shading and for plantings. And you'll see that even along that retaining wall fence line that we're talking about, we are beautifying. We are putting in shrubs and smaller trees. I'm not going to say they're huge trees because we don't have the depth, as you can see in the other symbols, but we are beautifying the site quite a bit. And it is going to be a beautiful experience to drive past.
And any other commissioners follow-up questions for the applicant?
There was somebody who asked about the timelessness of the architecture. I was under the impression that those elevations were in color. Is there a different view we should be imagining?
I believe our packet included a rendering on the cover sheet. Bill, do you know if that is part of?
Mr. Wright, is there anything else that we have that we could show?
Yeah, and if you zoom in on that, you'll see that we have 3 or 4 tones of gray, and then the logo has the red. We also have clear glazing on the first floor and tinted glazing on levels 2 and 3.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and
Thank you.
have you sit down. Commissioners, this is our time to discuss this project, bring up concerns. Go ahead.
I wanted to know if staff could tell us what the transitional setback standards are when commercial is adjacent to residential. I think we've alluded to them, but maybe it would help some of the neighbors to understand what protections are written into the code that they maybe don't even realize are happening for them.
Yeah, so along those property lines, when commercial abuts residential, there's a 10-foot landscape requirement. So it doesn't require trees, but it requires landscaping, which you can see there, providing those shrubs that were mentioned. And then there's that retaining wall in that location. So I think if that kind of helps to soften that edge a little bit too. And then the other thing was about the trash enclosure. Those are in the transitional setback standards as well. So if it wasn't adjacent to residential, the trash enclosure could go in that location where it is, but because of those, it's required to be at least 25 feet back.
Would that be the same for the covered parking as well? That's a structure that would need to be 25 feet away, or is it just the trash?
The structures just have to meet the setback requirements, which those covered parking are beyond I believe beyond the 25 feet would be my guess.
Is 25 the transitional? Because sometimes in a transitional setback situation, they step up. So it can be this height at a certain distance, and then it can be higher at a certain distance. Is there anything on this combination of uses?
Yeah, on this, they're not close enough to, or they're not going tall enough to reach that. So it's everything beyond the a certain height has to be 1 foot back for every 2 feet above a certain height. But in this case, the building 230 feet away, it's in compliance with those.
Thank you. I would love to talk about that because I know that it's scary to think that a 52-foot tall building is going to go in behind you. But I actually have a 3-story tall structure that built on a hilltop behind me, and it's immediately next to the fence. Almost, it's probably 10 feet, 15 feet from the back fence, and it doesn't shade my yard, and it doesn't block. I mean, it blocks my view of the mountains simply because it's in between me and the mountains. But I really don't think that 230 feet would be the equivalent of, I don't know, here to the grocery store, maybe. And I feel like maybe it's hard to imagine how far away that is. And I feel like this design really makes that not a big deal for me. This development was zoned to have commercial uses next to it. They're not asking for a change. These condos went in with the zoning in place. These people purchased or rented with the zoning in place. And I feel like this is actually a project or a situation with zoning that I get excited about, because this is how zoning should work, where we have the arterial of State Street with a commercial or industrial use along it, and then we gradually move away from that. And just the layout of this property helps to transition that use and give it a buffer. You've got, what was the zone to the north? Heavy commercial. So already this is an improvement on the uses across to the northwest and to the north. I even think it's an improvement on everything to the south for quite a ways. So it's not housing, but I would never expect anyone to have to build housing along State Street. So I feel like this is a really good example of why we have the zoning code and why we have these transitional standards, and why the design review committee is being very careful about the layout of things, so that you have the nicest possible project in between a very intense use on State Street and and a neighborhood. And I feel like the developer is taking that into account as well. I'm not worried about the traffic concerns. That was one I forgot to summarize. I'm sorry. Because I feel like this traffic is not going to come from the neighborhood. This traffic's going to come from State Street and it's going to end at this project. It's not going to wander through the neighborhood. So if the school bus stop is on 1410 and 1320, that is a potential conflict to be aware of, especially if any of those kids are coming from across State Street. But I would imagine that there's a school bus stop on the west side of State Street, that school bus wouldn't make them walk across State Street. So I don't see the conflict being huge with that type of pedestrian traffic at that time in the morning when people are coming to work. Additionally, if we're talking 8 to 5 opening hours, the school bus pickups are around 7:35, 7:40 in that area. So I'm hopeful that there wouldn't be a huge crossover with those. I feel like the developer is aware of the light and noise concerns. And like I say, the shading and the view. If somebody can see in your window from 230 feet away, they can see in your window from anywhere. So that doesn't really, like, I live in a fishbowl with 5 neighbors in my backyard who can see into my bedroom window, and it's not fun. So I have empathy for that, but it doesn't feel like something where you can say you can't build here because you might be able to see in someone's backyard. It's just unfortunately the way development goes. Those are some of my thoughts.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit to a couple of those. I ran the math once we got the height on it. Hopefully I did it right, but I think the elevation is about 14 degrees above the horizon. So from those houses when you're that far away, so it's not a huge obstruction. That means the sun, since it's an east-west configuration, won't get blocked until it's basically sunset anyway. So it's not going to make it cold and icy and those kinds of things. Those are important concerns, so I wanted to look into them. Also on the distance, I noticed a couple factors here. Privacy is a concern. I think that's a very valid, important concern to look at. I noticed most of the windows on it, because of the angles in the building, actually do look straight at the townhomes. They're looking away from them, which is important. There might be a few in the middle that look that way, but they're even farther. So I was just looking it up, and it's proportional to distance. So something that's 2.5 feet wide looks 2.5 feet wide looks 1/100th of a foot from that distance. So your window looks that big from that kind of distance. So that's important and would be much less of an intrusion of privacy than if there were another row of townhomes right behind it. And so I think that's important to think about as well. So overall, yeah, I think, grocery store always would be nice, but they tried, it didn't work. And this is an excellent alternative for that spot.
Yeah, I'll remark, this is a use that we haven't seen come in on State Street for years. There's been housing, there's been storage, there's been higher density housing, school. This is a use that just hasn't come in since I've been in the last 4 years since I've been on the commission, and I'm familiar with that neighborhood, and I haven't seen any offices come in there in 15, 20 years before that. So that's excited for that. Go ahead, Commissioner South.
So I like a lot of things about the design, the development. I think it's responsible. I think it fits the area. One of the questions and a little bit of a concern for me is the zone designation. This is a shopping center too. And this is, to me, clearly like a business park type use. And so as I've read the use classifications for this area and tried to match that up, those all speak to direct to consumer or transacting businesses and shopping. That's not what's going in here. And so maybe this is a question for staff, what's the justification for keeping it at SC2 rather than doing a business park zone?
So the SC2 zone has a list of permitted uses. the land use code that this would fall under is listed in there in the staff report as one of those permitted uses for professional services. So
But those professional services are really, I mean, I just read the list, and this is quite a stretch to call this professional services, I think, under the current land use code designation. I mean, that's professional services, 6,200, including laundry, photography, beauty and barber services, clothing repair, et cetera. And then it goes to the long list.
Yeah, okay, you said SU 6200 and the report cites SLU 6590.
Correct.
Are we talking about two different?
6590 is the land use that I'm referring
Okay.
to that's in the SC2 zone.
6590 is miscellaneous professional services.
Jeez, that's a lot of codes.
But the point is a valid point. I think the city has had the desire for more retail type uses, and that's why the zoning has never been changed. Because this is a permitted use in the zone, it's allowed to move forward.
Even all of these are direct to consumer.
Right.
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that, Mr. Wright. We're looking at these here now. We're seeing these. I don't know, it just feels like a big stretch to say that this is shopping related. And if that's important to the community in our general plan, should we alter that to suggest this is really for professional offices rather than shopping services? I don't know, maybe it's a straining at gnats, but
Yeah. Going through those land uses, there's quite a few. I think when they're put in there, they do try to look at what surrounding uses are and those type of things in the zone. But if there's a need to take another look at that, we can do that as staff as well.
What are some of our other comparable SC2 zones? I mean, is that like the stuff like Days Thriftway, Days Market on Canyon Road, or
That's actually SC1.
that's neighborhood.
okay, or what are some other SC2 ones? Is
So the Walmart
University-
Shopping Center on the Parkway is an SC2.
is also the across from the Walmart, is that SC2?
Part of that's SC3 and part of it's TOD.
Okay.
There's SC2 on University on North Freedom, right where it hits University Parkway on the west side of Freedom. That's an SC2 zone.
That old office
Yes.
plaza
Yes.
that has the dialysis on the corner.
The single story
Yes.
primarily medical offices.
Village
a lot of it's
Green or
vacant
something
right
like
now.
that it's called,
Village
yes.
Green.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to the general plan and just the general intention, while I love the building and I love the use, I love the economic development in Provo, the concern is if we change this to an office park, then we will effectively lose this piece of property for the foreseeable future. For retail and other types of business type transactions.
Yes, certainly the city would have preferred retail type uses because of the tax base there.
Yeah.
But the property's been vacant and we've been marketing it trying to get it for that for more than 20 years. It seems to me, I have a problem telling the property owner, well, just keep waiting because we're still hoping to get retail.
Yeah.
Mr. Moore is our economic development director. He could
Yeah,
speak more specifically.
I'll say like I'm familiar with this area. I agree with you, Mr. South. I think the entire neighborhood has been clamoring and dying for a supermarket, but your sentiment is not lost at all. And then you say like, well, if we give it away now, like we'll lose that opportunity. But I want to be clear. This has been vacant and lost since the late 90s.
Yeah, I think it's been more than 20 years. I'm Keith Moore, the Economic Development Director. I've pitched that site specifically countless times since I've been here, since January 2020, for potential retail sites. for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. I'm sympathetic to your comment, and surely we would like retail there as much as anything else. But one thing that I think I resist a little bit is sometimes we try to force the market to do things it's not inclined to do on its own, and there's always a penalty for that. And to me, what the market is telling us, for whatever reason, because of the traffic pattern along this part of State Street or the density or whatever, that this isn't a good location for what we had hoped would happen there. And this is a response to that as an alternative that fits our zone. I mean, if you want to consider it a stretch, I understand that perspective. But to me, if you talk to Brandon Fugel, the head of Colliers International here in the state, he'll tell you that the office market is apocalyptic right now. So the fact that anybody wants to build an office project in Provo, to me, is a win on a piece of property that's been vacant for more than 20 years. And to put that property back on the tax rolls and create significant property values for us so that the residents don't have to see property tax increases to pay for the services that they want. I just think it's a win. I mean, it's a small portion of this property. Hopefully, maybe there's still an opportunity for some retail to develop around it. Maybe once there starts to be this kind of energy at this location, these kinds of improvements. So I mean, we can continue to wait, but the last 20 years hasn't suggested that wait is going to be any more productive than the last 20 years has been.
To help illustrate Mr. Maury's point, when the Planning Commission and the City Council approved all the multifamily housing on South State Street, across the street from this and further to the south, Mr. Maury made maps of all of this new housing that had been approved and took that to the retailers and said, will this help persuade you to come to the neighborhood? Look at all these new units that are going to be built. And some of those were even under construction by that time. Made no difference. Did not help us get a retailer. So Mr. Maury really has tried.
I wonder if some of the dissatisfaction with the land use code falling into it is simply the name of shopping center too. That when we see the zone shopping center, we envision something and don't realize everything that it encompasses.
Well, I think that's maybe my second part. Again, I appreciate the work of staff and our public service going out there and trying to market this and trying to serve what the people.
I'm not feeling attacked at all.
Okay,
Your
great.
comments are just fine.
The second one is, Jen, if we don't think this is an appropriate zoning classification for that area, should we, what's the difference between making, other than the bureaucratic steps of going through the process, is it more appropriate to rezone this section as a business park and then call it what it is?
If you ask me, my perspective is if there's still the opportunity to get some retail development here at this location, I'd love to see that happen. And if those two uses could be married together, that's kind of wonderful. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I'm not bothered by the fact that it's turning into this. I just think it's a nice outcome after waiting so long for something to happen. And I appreciate the comment about is the classification or the naming of the zone confusing. Realtors or brokers are pretty sophisticated. I mean, I don't think any of them are lost on what the opportunity is here just because of the name of the zoning. I mean, I think they do enough research to know what the different zones in our city allow and don't allow. So I think they're pretty much aware. The naming nomenclature might make us feel better. I don't know that it would change the perspective of the real estate market.
But part of you,
does SC2 capture the broadest amount of commercial? I mean, short of a SC3, does it capture
again,
the broadest amount of options?
I think the problem that you're struggling with is one we also struggle with as staff, and that is that much of our code, to be blunt, is kind of antiquated. It goes back to the 1970s.
Yep.
And this nomenclature plays into that. But that's why we've asked the city council for the budget to hire a consultant to write us a new ordinance. And we expect that to be funded in this next fiscal year. So I think a lot of these struggles you're having, I hope, will be fixed with the ordinance rewrite. Because that's going to then dictate new zoning designations all over the city.
I agree with, thank you for bringing all this up. You're all really smart and awesome. I definitely feel like we should I think it's better to keep more options open. If this is an option within that zone, I think it's better to keep it open rather than, I guess I want to say sort of like thinking of how cities traditionally have grown.
you know, even in the US hundreds of years ago, people like used the space how it was needed to be used, how the community wanted it. And so I think that it opens up, it still allows some oversight, but it also keeps it open enough that there are opportunities there without having to jump through too many hoops. So I think that that's a good thing. I get kind of excited when I look at this use. So we were looking at the zoomed in image, and if this isn't just for dramatics, it looks like it's a tax software company. And to me, that seems like a really stable, what am I looking for here? Just somebody that wants to invest in Provo. It's not just any old, let's sell it to one person. Like they already have somebody who wants to live there or who wants to be there, a tenant that wants to be there that has chosen this place as their home. And so the likelihood of that turning over rapidly is less than somebody who's just come in and leased a spot. And so there's really nowhere to eat down there. I think last I heard the restaurant that used to be a Hawaiian something or other is an Ecuadorian cuisine. And then there's sometimes a restaurant in the gas station that I don't even think is a gas station anymore by Bicentennial Park. And so maybe having an office building will be the catalyst for some of these things that we haven't seen, like the Amish market that stayed for a while. Some of these places, there'll actually be people who are working down in that area that maybe it will be the catalyst that we need for some sort of retail. And it won't be a shopping center, but maybe it'll be a restaurant that
Both of them, they're Ecuadorian, and the other one's Korean in the gas station. They're both delicious. Any other commissioners? More discussion? Does anyone want to put forward a motion? I haven't heard. Other than Mr. South's concern about not fully utilizing the full potential of that property, which I think we all agree with. We all share that concern for sure. And I think some of the concerns, if I could, the concerns that were brought up by the public, privacy, I think were addressed by Commissioner Hill, with the distances we have in between. The concerns with illumination, I think, were brought up. With traffic, yes, it brings more traffic, but I think it's not traffic that's going to spill into the adjacent neighborhood.
and there's a light there to deal with it, which there isn't in a lot of places along State Street. So as far as location, I feel like that light was planned specifically with something big here. It's ready for it.
Yeah, the trash was a concern, but we already know, and the staff has addressed that, that where it's proposed on that site map, it can't be there anyways because it's too close. So it has to be relocated.
I appreciate
and that's
this.
a condition on the staff recommendation anyways.
I appreciate the suggestions that Mr. Mon made about how to cover it or to keep it from heating up and becoming a stinky eyesore. Stinky and an eyesore.
I think a lot of these concerns were addressed. I'm willing to hear any motions.
So I agree. Well, I'm sympathetic to all the public comments because it's hard to have something built behind you. All this was predetermined with the zoning. So much of it we can't really do anything about. And this is a really great option, I think. I think the developer has taken care to take those things into consideration, pushed it as far forward as possible, giving as much distance between the structure and the residences. So, and they're willing to address these other concerns, including the trash and the light. So I would like to make a motion.
Yeah, I want to, I'm going to say one last thing and we'll have you make the motion. Just, we've seen other projects come up along State Street where there's been rezones from commercial or industrial or some type of other retail type zoning to residential. So I think that we're still preserving a commercial use here is important and valuable. But go ahead.
Okay, so I would make a motion that we approve the requested project plan application with the following for a new 3-story office building in the SC2 zone located at 1255 South State Street, the Provost neighborhood.
Provost South.
I'm sorry.
Provost South neighborhood.
Oh, sorry, Provost South neighborhood. With the following conditions: that the remaining CRC comments are addressed for final approval, that the lot to be used for this PPA is subdivided from the larger parcel and a new plat is recorded, and that the trash enclosure is relocated 25 feet from the residential property line per section 14.34.30010.
Any discussion on the motion? Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and vote, starting with Commissioner Hill.
Aye.
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 Okay, that's unanimous 7-0 approval. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting, following a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I motion that we adjourn.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.